Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Sam's Healing Podcast. I'm joined today by a regular contributor, James Annear. I'm honored, as always, that you're here. Today's going to be a fun day, but a real, I think, insightful day. So, as always, thanks for coming in to visit with me, James.
As always, it's a great pleasure, Sam. So, I'm really looking forward to this one in particular.
I'm going to jump right in. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overstep you. I'm going to jump right in. We were talking the other day, and you said something that floored me, which you do quite often, and it's always a positive. But, we as coaches and clinicians, as partners, as spouses, as friends, we can jump to the conclusion, we can race to judgment to say that person's just being a victim. They're just being victim-y, or they can get very victim-y. We can say to our partner, spouse, loved one, our kids, we can say, stop being a victim. But we were talking the other day, and you said something that was so compassionate, and it was a totally different side of the victim label. And I wrote it down. You said, and I quote you, you said, "We're not victims unless we've been made victims as a child." And it sent chills down my spine. I was victimized as a child. We deal with people all day long who were made victims as children. So as we jump right in, man, open up that statement because it's such a healing statement.
So I do want to add the caveat of people who've been victimized as adults, of course. Right. So if somebody hasn't had, everybody's had victimization experiences as a child. It depends on how impactful they were. As adults, if something happens to us, say we're robbed or we're physically assaulted or shamed at work and all of these things, then we certainly have a new victim experience from which we can then act as a victim as a result of that, right? Sure. Most of the time, though, people don't naturally act from a victim place unless it has occurred in childhood, and that's sort of how they've taken on or what they've taken on as how the world is going to treat them.
Is it that causes people to, when they hit difficulty, they hit maybe trauma, that they will retract into a position of helplessness, into a position of feeling like there's no way out? I was cautious because before you might say, is that what causes people to feel like such a victim? And it's such a shaming statement.
Right.
But walking in the alignment of what you're saying that there's a reason people will regress into feeling helpless like a victim, right?
Absolutely. So, the word trigger is used, obviously a lot because it's a really great word to describe, something occurring that pushes a button and pushes a wound, really, right? And puts us in a certain reaction. So the victim reaction is often when we're being shamed, when we're being, this is a very strong word, but persecuted, or feel like we're being persecuted, or if it's similar to when we were victimized when we were young. Sometimes it doesn't have to follow the exact pattern for it to trigger us. It can just look like it, right? It can look like it. It can be tangential. It can be even unintended. But it will hit that part of our brain that remembers that. So it's often an implicit memory, meaning you're not going to remember exactly why.
It's like we say, trauma shows up as a reaction, not a memory, right?
Yes.
So would it be safe to say when we're dealing with our partner, our spouse, especially in trying to heal from infidelity or addiction or some type of betrayal trauma, would it be fair to say, because you do intensives all the time, you're seeing this on the front lines, you're seeing this in real time, as am I, coaching clients and really helping them. Is it your opinion and your observation that oftentimes we can regress into a victim state because we don't see any way out? We suffered trauma when we were young. There was abandonment. There was rejection. Maybe we're a child of an alcoholic, as I am. But it's such a different angle to say. It's kind of like we're saying this, and correct or adjust this statement. If your partner is becoming victim-y, maybe there's a reason that they're becoming or acting victim-y because they were subjected to some pretty awful stuff. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. There's also, it can become and does become something else. So if we stay in the arena of betrayal, trauma, the actor or the unfaithful, right? The person who acts out or is unfaithful. Often they start out in that victim stance because of something that they learned as a child. So just hitting that first point that you made, if you talked about regression. So if we get hit by something that seems like that original wound or hits that particular button, right? Yes, we regress back to that emotional age, right? It's not that we're going to necessarily start stomping our feet or whatever we might have done, although you see that happen, right? You know when somebody's fully regressed when that's happening. What we will definitely do is go into the shame, because there's no victimization as a child that doesn't include shame, right? And so they're really almost inextricable in terms of what we're talking about. That said, in betrayal trauma, an actor or an unfaithful can use the victim stance or is so much embedded in their own victim role that they don't even see it. And yet, man, everything becomes somebody else's fault. They can't, it's what makes it difficult for a lot of people in recovery or early recovery to own things, to take responsibility, be accountable, and such.
So taking this approach, I'm sure there's a betrayed partner sitting here driving or listening going, that's exactly it. Every time I try and talk to them or confront them or interact with them about getting help, they regress or they revert to this victim stance. And it can be so infuriating for the betrayed. It can send them into a tailspin of hopelessness, depression, rage, all of the stuff that we know. But how does the betrayed empower themselves? What can they do? Because they can't just sit back, right? And just say, well, I've tried. There's nothing I can do. How do they empower themselves? How do they start to work smarter, not harder?
Well, the first thing is unconscious or conscious, right? The victim stance will create pity. And we're talking, partners tend to be very empathetic, so they can be drawn in. So that's the first thing they can do is set that internal boundary that, ooh, wow, that's hitting my pity button. It's making me want to take care of this person. So when they feel that, that's a great spot to go, okay, no, this isn't good, because it can take them down the road back into all of the same trauma bonded interactions that they have had so far. And so that's the first thing, is to be self-protective.
And I love that, because so many times the betrayed, male or female, will light themselves on fire to keep the relationship going.
Yeah.
I did a video just recently on overfunctioning, where we or the betrayed will overfunction because they feel like they have to keep recovery work or whatever going. They're sacrificing, they're self-neglecting, self-abandoning just to keep the momentum going because they feel like it's their only tool. Okay, but I love what you said. It puts the onus on the betrayed to say, ooh, I've got to have an internal boundary that says I'm not going to keep playing this game, because what we tolerate, we cannot change. So if they keep playing the game, they keep losing power. So they sense it and they go, my good buddy James taught me about this internal boundary. I'm not playing this game. What's the next step? Or what's a next step?
So if needed, they will probably have to make an external boundary, right? If they're going to stop playing the game, if they're not, they've got to be able to make that external boundary. And that could look like saying, we need to put this on hold. You might need to make a phone call to one of your supports, or if they have a sponsor or a therapist, I need to go and take care of myself. And so it's a very effective self-care to take care of yourself and leave the room, whatever that takes. Make a phone call yourself, give yourself some breathing, some breath work, somatic, so stuff in the body interventions are the best because they access the right brain immediately and help which is the emotional regulation side of the brain. So partners really, to become safe, they unfortunately have to learn to keep themselves safe.
Yeah.
Actors can make them feel unsafe, but they can't pull them into safety, right? They can't pull it. They can do everything right. And the partner has to make their choice to move into their own safety. And that's actually a really good thing, because it's on the unfaithful to do their recovery right. And then the partner gets to choose when they're ready. It's their timing. That's really vital. So the victim place can also go to where the unfaithful is going, well, why am I not allowed to feel? When am I allowed to feel? When are you going to be over this? This is just, and so on. And, questions like, when am I allowed to feel? What does that sound like? It sounds like a victim.
Yeah.
Right? It's a lie we tell ourselves, right? Because it is a victim statement. And the actor, the unfaithful, has to then take themselves out of that. Now that could apply to anybody. If they're feeling like they're being victimized, how do you get yourself out of that? You can't rely on the person who's victimizing. Now, granted, their perspective is off because the person isn't victimizing. They're reacting out of trauma to what you did to them.
Right.
So, it's hard to be victimized by something that you caused in this sense, right? It's your responsibility to pull yourself out. Okay. So
it makes great sense. Now, you said something that is brilliant. It's a bit counterintuitive to what you kind of hear out there in the mainstream Instagram, YouTube world, that the betrayed has to make themselves safe. They have to create their own safety. 1,000% I agree with you. For the betrayeds that may have kind of heard that and said, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Because there are some people, and a lot of times it's people that maybe haven't been through infidelity or have been through infidelity and quite honestly are not healed. And they will say, you've got to make the betrayed feel safe. There is a component to that by the way you live, the way you talk, the way you communicated as unfaithful. Absolutely. But explain when you say that the betrayed has to create their own safety.
So I'm going to say it in a couple of different ways. The first is when we're trying to keep or create safety for our partner, right? That is really the most we can really do is to not make them feel unsafe. So we do everything right. So that's an important distinction, because otherwise we're assigning sort of a much more powerful status to ourselves. Right. So now, partner, the reason that it's her choice is because she can, that's going to need a lot of evidence there, but she can also make herself safe in other ways. So the easiest way to say that is if we can, as helpers, help partners stop seeing themselves or defining themselves as a product of their betrayal trauma and start redefining themselves as who they are, which is rediscovering who they are, right? Because so much of that is absolutely lost in the betrayal. And so that's where the safety starts to come in. So that's where we go from the devastated place. This is our Venus model, right? And out here is the me space. This is for a partner, the devastated space. The next space is the safe space. In between, there's this liminal space that I previously described as sort of a crack in a glacier, and it's only one pace apart, right? But it's 1,000 feet deep.
Right.
So the fear of going from that chaos and pain into that safety area where you start to get to know who you are again, start to trust yourself. That's not trusting the other person. That definitively comes later. But to take that one step can be so fear-inducing because it's 1,000-foot drop, it feels like. Right. But once you've taken the step, and usually that's with people holding your hands and they're going to take the step with you, then you can enter into safety. So what that means is that a partner makes that choice to go into that place. And it has to be about her. It can't be reliant on whatever I'm using her there. But it has to be about the partner. It cannot be reliant on what the unfaithful does, because otherwise you're at the mercy of that person's progress.
That's exactly right. And you are surrendering a level of power to the unfaithful when the betrayed feels like I've surrendered so much already. So I like to tell them, look, you have to create your own safety. Now, trusting them too early can actually be completely naive and hurtful and just really not necessary. So we both know that infidelity strips the betrayed of their ability to trust themselves. They stop trusting themselves. They stop trusting life. They start to doubt everything and anything. It is a very traumatic experience. But I love how you say them learning how to trust themselves again. That's a process, a big time process.
It is.
Now, we're going to say something. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay.
Now, let me shift gears. So let's say there's an unfaithful, male or female, and they're having a moment. Some people that come from faith, or some people in Texas would say they're having a come to Jesus moment. Maybe they're having a moment of self-reflection and they're saying, I can get kind of victim-y. I can feel sorry for myself, but I feel stuck in it. It's my go-to, but I see that it's my go-to, and I see that it's hurting my partner. What is the unfaithful to do? If that is just part of their kind of toolbox that they learned from childhood, that they've kind of gone to, how can they start to confront that and start to heal from it?
So what is, if you go to the very basic, this is going to sound a little cliche, right? But if you go to the very basic, when we're victimized or shamed, we're basically being told we're not worthy and we're not enough. So I'm being really simplistic there. Right. So the first thing to do is to start addressing, where do I feel not enough? That might be easier to address when you see your own behaviors. So victim type behaviors are, oh, it's all my fault, or blaming outwardly. Right. But, it's so I like to look at whenever this is years ago, thankfully. I hope it doesn't come up again. But whenever I would say, well, it's all your fault. Well, my sponsor says, or my group says, or, my book says this. And so that, I end up gaslighting, right? So when I started to recognize those things, I could then go, whoa, what's going on here? No, I'm going into a victim role. And the victim always sees people in another perspective than they necessarily are. So a victim will see somebody as a persecutor. I'm using Steve Cartman's work here. As a persecutor or a rescuer. Well, the problem is the rescuer is never going to be able to do exactly what the victim wants, right? So it's never going to be good enough. It'll create resentment. And the persecutor is always going to be pop them, right? But the problem is it's all in perspective. And if you go with Cartman's triangle, which we can talk about in another one, it revolves. So if a victim feels like the rescuer's being not doing what they want, they can become a persecutor. right? They can start doing the yelling. So, the problem with that is the victim very easily becomes the victimizer,
Mm.
right? When you're in that victim role, and granted, did they come by it honestly? If it occurred in childhood, they certainly did. Right. Well, I mean, obviously some adult things, absolutely. But, typically, yeah, if you're a child, what do you do about it? You talked about some things earlier. And if you're a child, what choices do you have? Your parents are your gods. You're reliant on them for everything. So if you're a victim in that household, you can't escape that. So when that victim button gets pressed, you feel like you don't have choices. And that's where something else comes in. And what can I do in this situation to empower myself? So then the victim becomes the chooser.
Mm.
He's flipping that, or she is flipping that to become the opposite of it. My choices are no longer being taken away. I'm identifying the choices that I have, and guess what? I can act on those. And when I do act on those, I am empowering myself. And when I empower myself, I move myself out of the victim.
I think that's beautiful. I mean, I think it's a picture of being able to say, wait a minute, I have a choice in how I respond right now. I don't have to go regress. I don't have to go to this particular approach that says, and it looks like this. We've all done it as unfaithful. You're never happy. There's never enough. It's always something. I can't make you. And we sit back here now and go, oh, it makes me want to throw up because I remember saying those things.
Absolutely.
But I also can look back, and betrayeds, take a deep breath when I say this. I can also look back and feel compassion for myself and realize that I wasn't in my right mind. I wasn't healthy, and I was acting out of a role that at some level was forced upon me, but was not very healthy. And it took someone like you, it took someone like Rick Reynolds to not constantly tell me that I was acting like an ass, although sometimes he did, but to also say, listen, and you said it wonderfully. What are you feeling right now? What does this remind you of? How old do you feel right now? Do you feel like when you were 10 and you were maybe unfortunately sexually abused or violated, or you were just abused mentally or verbally? When he did things like that, when my own therapist has done stuff like that, it set me free, right?
Right. So, you might put that under the heading of reality therapy.
Mm-hmm. We could all use a lot of that.
Yes, we could. There in Cambridge, there's there's a crosswalk, right before the students go into town. There's this little piece of sort of a statuary almost, but it's just a signpost, and it says reality checkpoint. And I love it because what it was put there for by the town was to say, hey, you're incredibly intelligent, you're gifted, you're all these things, but now you're entering town. There are real people here. You need to check your ego, right? And so what we need to do is just check ourselves. Am I being a victim here? Why do I feel put upon? Why do I feel these things? So there's that big why. I love it. The curious why will stop every single trauma spiral. And when somebody goes into their victim, feeling pity for themselves, coming from, here's the turtle, right? This as a kid. Some kids will turtle. And why do they do it? Because they want their parents to prove to them that they're lovable. Right. And so we do it the same way. When we go into a victim, it's like doing this. Prove to me that I'm lovable. Prove to me that I'm worthy, that I'm enough. And the thing is, we have to prove that to ourselves. Because guess what? Our partners have been proving it to us our entire marriages.
Woo! Now we're getting personal. No, but that's a brilliant statement. But not a but. I had this happen the other day. My followers and those that have watched my videos for a long time know I'm pretty honest and pretty straightforward. The other day, I was raging mad. Someone had really pissed me off, and someone really close to me. And I hit a point where I was mad, and I knew enough. And Thank God it took about 6 minutes of anger, right? Back in the day, it'd have been a day or two, maybe a week, and there could have been other behaviors. But it took about 6 or 7 minutes. And I finally said to myself, which I think would be a great tool for the unfaithful, and the betrayed can use this tool. I finally had this moment and I said, why is this making me so mad? What age do I feel right now? Why is this triggering me so bad? And it stopped me dead. And I was like, it took me another 5 minutes to go, this reminds me of when I was betrayed by this group of people and these guys left me for dead. This feels like betrayal. Holy crap. And it took me a moment to go, okay, hold on. Maybe this person isn't really the issue that's raging, that's causing me to get so angry. This is reminding me of when I felt like this. And it brought me back to my adult, as one therapist would say, my functional adult self. It brought me back to a sense of grounding. So at some level, that's what you're describing, right? Going to the deeper level.
Absolutely. So the curious why, I don't know that I made that up. I think, I'm not even sure. Heather Platt, but Brene Brown, but the curious why stops a trauma spiral in its tracks. Now, we work to help people get to a place where they just sort of automatically go to their somatic, whether it's tapping or breathing. We say practice it, because that will stop the trauma spiral dead in its tracks. The interesting thing is that curious why does as well. So, I've had sponsees and people early in recovery say, but I'm getting triggered. I get triggered. This is West Palm Beach, right? So there are horrible billboards and everything. You can be triggered by a billboard easily here. And so, I've had people say, well, I travel here to your office and I pass 3 billboards that trigger me. And I'm like, okay, so what's the trigger trying to tell you? It's not saying, because the fear is I'm going to go on a run here, right? It's going to trigger me and I'm going to act out. Well, if you've built up enough layers, you're probably not. Fortunately, they asked me the question and I'm a layer, right? I'm a big layer. And so I'm able to say, okay, so think of it as a cue. Don't think of it as a trigger that's going to spiral you down into relapse and all of that. Think of it as a cue. Right? So what's it trying to tell you? Okay, well, at the very surface, what emotions am I? I'm feeling stressed out right now. I've got a lot on me right now. Okay, so are you hungry, angry, lonely, tired, feeling shame, or shout, right? Instead of halt, the AA thing. So shout, shame, shame, any of those. Okay, now we're getting a bit deeper. So if you can apply that to things other than those basic acting out triggers, you can apply it to anything. What you were talking about, why am I feeling this way right now? And if it's a cue, so you're looking at that now as a cue to something deeper going on. When we're able to ask that question, we are immediately out of victim mode because now we're taking their power back. Yeah. So people who live in that almost natural victim mode, got it in childhood, have to learn how to empower themselves. And when they do that, it takes the load off of their partner that who's been trying to carry that for so long, right? So that's a whole other discussion.
But it's so good. It is so good that you just even said that. And I think a lot of times for betrayed and unfaithful, mostly betrayed, they hit this moment where they feel like they don't have any power. I remember, as we say goodbye, I'm going to tell this quick story. I remember I was in elementary school. I was in 5th grade. And Robbie used to bully everybody. Robbie was crazy. Robbie would yell and scream and lose his mind. And when we would play marbles, he would just bully everybody. And I'll never forget one day I had had enough. And Robbie was yelling and screaming, and I felt so scared. And I finally punched Robbie right in the diaphragm. And I hit him so hard, and he went to his knees. And it was like a celebration that the warrior had come to town. All these 5th graders were yelling Sam's name and giving me high fives. And Robbie is on the ground. And I felt like so invigorated, because I had finally done one thing, which was punch back. And I think today has been a wonderful picture on how the unfaithful and how the betrayed can fight back against their own trauma, against the overwhelmment, not against their partner, but against the trauma that they have dealt with, how they can fight back and empower themselves in a situation that feels so disempowering. As always, I'm incredibly thankful for you coming in. As we say goodbye, is there a particular book? You talk a lot about somatic help and work. What's a good way for people to get introduced to somatic work for themselves? Or maybe to even go home, maybe they go home tonight and they're like, hey, I read about this somatic work. We should try it for our relationship. How can they do that?
So I think the number one thing I can think of is The Body Knows the Score by Peter Levine. It's
a great book.
It's not long, which is great for us ADD people. And it really goes into the whys and how it works. And, it's really incredibly well written. And so that's a really great place to start. We have on our website a rather long, webinar on brain trauma, but at the end of it, there are tips for people to help themselves heal. So it's really tips for actors or unfaithful to help their partner to heal, and then tips for the partner to help themselves heal. Those tips for the partner can be used by anybody, right? Okay. So there are things like, there are a bunch of somatic things, but also, it's not just breath work and, oh man, I got to meditate or, or tap or hand over heart and belly, but it's also do things like get on a swing set.
Yeah.
It takes you back to talk about positive childhood stuff, takes you back to that. And the motion itself is extraordinarily calming. So to the point where my wife, Sharon, was telling all these partners to get swing sets or to go to the park and swing. So for her birthday one year, I bought a swing set and had it installed in the backyard, and she swings on it nearly every day.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
As we say goodbye today, for those of you that are listening and watching, I'm so glad that you tuned in. I hope that this was encouraging and uplifting. If I can help, you can reach out to me at samshealingpodcast@gmail.com. For those of the followers that want to find your website, James, maybe they're new and this is one of the first podcasts, how do they find your site? How do they get in touch with you?
So it is at hope4, so that's spelled out FOR, us.com. So hopeforus.com. And we are core relationships, recovery. And then you can also find it under that.com.
Awesome. Thanks again, James. I always love you coming in and helping us find healing. So thank you again. And for those of you that have tuned in today, take care of yourself. You're worth it.